Let's start with data type. When you write function in Java, since it is object-oriented programming language, you start with public and static keyword. Then we have returning type, that means what value will this function return. It can be any data type, boolean, int, string, char, but it also can be array, and it can also be nothing, because sometimes we don't want to return a value. In this case, we return integer value. Then we have the name of our function. This name should be telling you what function does. After that, we have so-called parameters. That is the input. Once again, you can have any data type, or this parentheses can be empty. In this case, we accept one integer value, and inside of this function, we access it by name x. Remember, this variable lives only inside of this function. You cannot access it from different function. Then there is the body of function, where we do some operations. In this particular function, we set y to x times x, and then return y. Down here, I got example of a function call. It is actually pretty simple. We create variable of function return type, in this case int, and then we set its value to this function call. So we write the name of our function, and then in parentheses we write our arguments. In this example, value that will be set to x. And the cool thing is that after this call, I can call this function again with different argument, and it will still return this argument squared. So in this case, 25. Another type of function is the function without output value. So here is example. I got here public static and then void keyword. This means that this function is not returning any value, but it accepts one argument, some integer value, and it prints this argument. So if I want to call this function, it would look something like this. Since there is no output value, we don't need to store the information. We just call this function. So for example, I can call this with temp variable, and what computer does is he looks at the value of variable and pass the value to this function. So in this case, he calls it with 25. Another example of how you can call this function is here, where we pass the result of some operation. Computer evaluates this expression, finds out it's 25, and set the number variable to 25. Another function I got here is this function. It takes two integer numbers and it returns Boolean value, so true or false, indicating whether the first number is bigger than the second one. So you can pass multiple arguments to function. In this example, we are passing two values. And let's see how we call this function. First case is similar to the first call. Since the output of this function is Boolean value, we create Boolean variable and initialize it to the result of this function call. In this case, false. Also, other interesting thing you can do is use the output value in some condition. So, for example, if 10 is bigger than 8, you print 10 is bigger than 8. And that works, because the output of this function is Boolean value. So when computer runs into this if, he evaluates the function and finds out it is true. So he executes the instructions in these braces. Also, you can use this inside some cycle. So, for example, while temp is smaller than 1000. We set temp to result of temp squared. So eventually we break out of this cycle and then we print temp. And last thing I want to show you is a function without arguments. So, for example, this one. It have no output value, so it is a void. And these parentheses are empty, so it accepts no arguments. So if you want to call this function, you just write the name and empty parentheses like this. And that's it. So if you have questions, just ask them, and I will see you next time.